All right. Hello, everyone. The attendees are starting to come in. I just want to, first of all, say thank you to all the speakers today, and don't mind my dog in the back, for participating in the Cannabis Industry Insights webinar series. We're really excited to have them. We will be taking Q&A towards the end of the session, but please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A platform, and please introduce yourselves in the chat function. Do your networking, say hi to one another. We want to see where you're coming from. And I'd like to introduce now the speakers. If you guys could just unmute yourselves and turn on the camera, that'd be great. And for anybody who might not have time to see this to the end, or know friends or colleagues who might want to see this, we will be sending out the recording to all of the registrants, and we will be putting it on our YouTube channel and our socials. So you'll be able to see it then. And I will take it over, or no, I'm not going to take it over. I'm going to give it over to Jose. Am I saying, I still can't say that right?
No, you got it, Jose.
Yeah? Okay. All right. I'll leave it to you guys. Have fun.
Hello, Kwekwe, bonjour. My name is Jose Monica Manon Bourgeois. I am sitting in my beautiful home in Pikwakanagan First Nations. Pikwakanagan is about an hour and 45 minutes west of the city of Ottawa in the province of Ontario. I can share with you that in terms of the Algonquin Nation, there are 9 other Algonquin communities on the Quebec side, and Pikwakanagan is very small, only about less than 2,000 registered members approximately, and less than 500 on reserve members. Growing up, I grew up in Ottawa. I grew up in Toronto most of my life. And I think we're gonna do like a little bit of a round of introductions first before we get into this all, but I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a platform of where this is all coming from. And so yeah, I grew up in Ottawa, Toronto. I lived in Nova Scotia for a little while, and I have a background in corrections, and I worked as a social program officer, and I worked in the First Nations treatment facility, the Wanakee Treatment Center in Kitigan-Zibi for 4 years as the accreditation coordinator, and I'll speak more about that later. And now I have a wonderful position as community engagement manager at Grassroots Healing here in Pikwakanagan, and it's been a year now from November last year to November this year. It's been 1 full year, and it's been very interesting. I'm half French. I speak French as well. If there's anybody who needs me to answer anything in French, I can maybe provide that. And yeah, I don't want to get too off track. I do a lot of different things, you know, as a human being. I take dance and being a dance artist very seriously, and very engaged in my culture, being a powwow dancer. And I'm super happy I get to share this platform with my dear friend Erin, who's also a powwow dancer as well. And Eric, someone that I'm getting to know through this here. Thank you, Eric, for joining us as well today. And that's all I'm going to say for now. So miigwech, and I'll pass it off to the next person. Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. So I'll introduce myself. Kwekwe. Hello, Hinu. My name is Gukuyashjet, which is Precious Hearted Woman. I am Teach Gitne Eagle Clan from Old Masset, Haida Gwaii. However, I do live here in this unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory that I consider myself a visitor, but do call home. I work with Jose at Grassroots Healing. I am a public relations specialist. I focus on media. I am currently enrolled with Ottawa University studying communications. One of the things that I'm interested in is the media and the stigma around cannabis and why it's not treated as medicine and it's more of a drug. I also have an interest in harm reduction, the good that it can bring to communities. I really enjoy plant medicine. I am a powwow dancer. I dance with Jose as well. I am very close to my traditional values. I just recently moved out of the city into the bush, where I have taken this last year during COVID and really learned to reconnect and start growing my own food, growing my own medicine, teaching my little one the exact same as we're going. Yeah, so that's a little bit about myself. I'm very excited to be here. I am very interested in starting in conversations. That's kind of what I do, being in PR. So yeah, hello, and I will pass it off to Eric.
Hello, Bojo. I'm Eric Hobius. I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing law for 13 years. I guess before I get into what I have done, I recently moved to Brantford, Ontario. I live within a stone's throw distance of Six Nations. So of course, it's important to acknowledge the Haudenosaunee territory that I am currently residing in. And I moved here like a month ago, and it's a wonderful place. So I'm originally from Ancaster, and which is not very far from Brantford itself. Went to the University of Toronto for undergrad. Went to the University of Saskatchewan for law school, studied at the Native Law Center there as well. Excellent professors there, quite frankly. Articled at the Federal Department of Justice. I was very lucky to do that. Sort of the other side of the spectrum, if you will, though. But great for experience as a federal prosecutor, a drug prosecutor of all things, which is crazy looking back at it. But I mean, diversion is obviously the name of the game there, because it's a bit ridiculous to put young people in jail for cannabis. I mean, I was never supportive of that to begin with. I returned to Ontario, worked as a land claim negotiator. I was the lead for a while in the Williams Treaty claim. Did a lot of different claims. That was part of the IPRWASH recommendations, where they had all these claims in backlog. They didn't even know how many claims they had. It was a ridiculous 2 years. But again, good experience. It's kind of like being a bank robber. You got a case to joint before you go in, right? So for the last 10 years, I've practiced law on my own as a sole practitioner. I worked for chiefs. I've worked for First Nation police at times. I've worked for protesters. I've worked for people who are laid off. I've worked to challenge elections at the federal court level. I've been to 17 or 18 different courts, boards, or tribunals, the Court of Appeal in Ontario. Litigation is, I guess it serves its purpose. I find it kind of fun. I like going in front of judges, but it's got a limited use. I mean, if we're talking today about the red market, litigation and court is not the way to settle this. And that's sort of the discussion that we should be having is we need to make sure that the red market is mainstream and accepted, because I mean, I'm getting tired of seeing First Nations become second thoughts and afterthoughts in government policy. I think it's completely unacceptable. So with that, I will hand it over to the moderator. Is anybody moderating? I should also say I'm not a good dancer, but I really like playing the drums.
Jose, I think you're on mute. There we go.
All right, okay, so I guess we're just taking over this now. Okay, that's fine. So I'm going to start by giving a little bit of a background about how we've come to have a red market that exists in Pikwakanagan, that Algonquin people are affiliated with, based on what I've experienced so far. So I lived here in 2015 after leaving Nova Scotia. And I lived here very briefly for less than a year because there just wasn't anything for a 30-year-old woman who just left a federal corrections position after 3 years to kind of keep me around, you know? And the only job I could really, you know, make sense with, other than grinding it out at a band office job, you know, that really wasn't going to fulfill my passions. I ended up working for Pikwakanagan Fuels, which was a gas station that just opened up, and it was a full service gas station. And it drew a lot of attention and drew a lot of business, and it really kind of changed the energy of Pikwakanagan. I ended up moving to Kitigan-Zibi, obviously because I didn't need to stay working at a gas station, as thankful as I was for that job at the time. I moved on to KZ and I worked at the Wanakee Center, at the treatment center, for 4 years, as I mentioned. And all the while, time's going on, and eventually 2018 came about when legalization was approaching. And the same business owner and his wife Jason Bernard, who's a Pikwakanagan band member, and his wife, Natalie Corbin, who are the owners of Pikwakanagan Fuels, they decided to start building ahead of time, way ahead of time, what is now Grassroots Healing, the entire facility. So, this kind of created some buzz within the community on the reserve, because there was this big, huge building being built. And the only thing that ever existed here in Pikwakanagan before was always tobacco shops, like these little like trailer kind of shops, drive-through little tobacco stores. And, other than the one other gas station and the few band office jobs that you can do seasonally or luck out to get, indeterminately, there really isn't anything else to do here in Pikwakanagan to survive without being on welfare. And that's just a fact. So now 2018 comes, this building exists, and people are realizing that, hey, like, it seems like there's some people that are going to take this cannabis thing seriously. And before you knew it, Grassroots was in operation, and they had opened their doors, and there was a response by the immediate community and by the exterior local community. Now, it's important to put the frame in terms of what was able to be created in Pikwakanagan right off the bat is kind of a unique situation. It doesn't apply to the evolution of any other cannabis community. It's not the status quo. What I mean by that is the chief and council of Pikwakanagan, they more or less allowed the members to kind of do their thing. And what was very unique about that free, natural flow of an industry to be created was the true intent that existed amongst the first few dispensary owners. So there was Grassroots, and then there might have been Smoke Signals, and then one or two other ones started to pop up within the first few months of legalization. And they started working together immediately with the intent to protect the integrity of the long term of the red market cannabis industry, simply by agreeing to work together and creating something called a Pikwakanagan Cannabis Business Association, a PCBA. And I can't get into a whole presentation about the ins and the outs, but I'm sure that I'll kind of weave in and out through it as we all talk along. But that basically showed chief and council that, like, hey, this isn't a free-for-all. This isn't, already a cutthroat sort of emergence of an industry within our tiny little community. Seemed to be off in a good way. And before you know it, the first year went by, and now it's 2 years, and now it's 3 years. And of course, there's a story, and COVID comes in here for sure, and puts a damper and kind of like a stop in the machine, and then the wheel is like, it was starting to just get going again. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of a story about how Pikwakanagan has arrived to having 13 dispensaries on the reserve and growing. If I'm going to mention that, chief and council have been pursuing or have been acting in this way, I should also say that the PCBA model where we have landed today is we're really, really, really putting the work into formalizing policies and procedure in the fact that we can present to our chief and council like a very solidified, almost like a strategic plan. And at the end of the day, these can be the bones that move forward with either a community referendum. That's just, one frame of a conversation, or possibly just working within the PCBA and the chief and council, maybe some interested community members to create a bylaw. Because at the end of the day, in the interest of the grassroots industry, we do want to have formalization, and we do want to have that cohesive strategic unity. It's professional. It's kind of hard to argue against having that. So
I just want to jump in on the PCBA. Yeah. So my experience, and I've seen, I'll say half a dozen different models from communities. The thing that makes that model quite successful is the fact that it's, I hate using this word, but it is industry led, right? It's the retailers who led it and then came together and they set their own rules of the road. They didn't wait for the First Nation to draft some of their own cannabis framework to model the federal or provincial government, which takes 2 or 3 years, right? And by that point, you already have retail just outside your border. Instead, they came together and they said, okay, you can't sell to children, of course, right? You've got to have certain labels on packaging, or you can't be getting high inside the stores because that makes us all look bad. And they came up with just some basic rules of the road, and they all agreed to subscribe by them. And then that allowed chief and council to not have to make the hard decisions. And in other communities, I've seen chief and council be opposed to it. The retailers don't listen to them. Chief and council call the OPP. And the OPP have the invitation from chief and council to go in and shut them down. And every time you see there's a raid, I'm always like, I'll say to my friend, I bet you they got a phone call. And, you know, a couple of weeks later, it trickles out that chief and council would warn them several times. And that's what happened. And you don't see that in PIC. And the reason why you don't see that is because they recognize the value to the economy. They recognize that, you know, Jose had said, you know, you work at a gas station or you're on welfare. Well, that's not the case anymore. People have really good jobs. People are business owners. And it's really changed the dynamic of the community. And you go in and you see the optimism in the community. I've been to, I go to, it's my job. I go all the time to different communities. They're always a little different and they're lovely to go to, but I don't know, there's a bit of a certain type of skip in the step when it comes to Pikwakanagan, and it's nice. And I think the reason why it was successful as a model is because the retailers came together and knew that they needed to act quickly and developed their own association. And they had sort of the you know, not the, they didn't have the approval because they didn't need the approval from the First Nation, but but the First Nation went along with it. And then from there, you have the issues with like the federal government handed over the retail operations to the province of Ontario. Well, obviously, First Nations aren't part of Ontario. So it's created this vacuum that the PCBA has operated extremely well in and will continue to do so. The OPP have no interest in acting at all. And it's, you know, and they've made it very clear. And from there, that's the line forward to having First Nations participate in the cannabis market. Because
in my role, I can share as community engagement manager, like everything Eric is saying is absolutely true. So grassroots healing is a dispensary, and Jason and Natalie are the owners. But you see, in terms of the other end of the red market and how Pikwakanagan members are involved in the red market and how my job extends outside of Pikwakanagan is through the distribution and the manufacturing components that they've gone into. So they've expanded past being a retailer. They're a wholesaler and a manufacturer and a distributor now. So take everything Eric just said, that's the truth in Pikwakanagan. But, you know, I can go east or I can go west or I can go north, any direction, and it's different. And I sit with, so my engagement points are either people from Chief and Council hear about Pikwakanagan and they hear about my position and they want the documents. What are the documents that you guys have? Like, how are you doing this so perfectly? And I don't want to say perfectly because it's not perfect, but you know, we have a great story in terms of what the PCBA has been able to pump out with community money. We can get to that later. I don't want to lose my track of thought here. So in other communities, you know, like there's just not that kind of dynamic sometimes where members are confident to assert their sovereign, self-determined, independent right that Eric mentioned, that no, we don't need our chief and councils to give us the green light to do this. But that doesn't mean that as soon as you order your supply, build your shop, have your grand opening, make your first sale, that you're not going to get shut down 5 minutes later. And then it becomes this internal battle. You know, and that's kind of touching on the politics of it all. And if Erin wants to take over from here, I'm sure she has some great points to add.
Yeah. The politics of it. I don't quite know what to add to that. I do actually know what to add to that. I am a guest in Pikwakanagan, and I love working in the community. The cannabis industry for me, we don't actually have dispensaries where I'm from, and something that I would love to see. I'm remote on an island in a community, and I wish we had, I guess there's me, we had something like the PCBA and grassroots healing and the other dispensaries, and not just to that community, other communities in general. There's a lot of great models out there. There's a lot of good people opening dispensaries, good people coming together. And when we come together and we start talking about sovereignty and being connected to the land, that's where cannabis has a really good stronghold. It is a traditional medicine. It does have a lot of value outside of it. Breaking stigmas. One of the nice things about the Indigenous dispensaries is it makes it accessible. Cannabis, when you talk about cannabis and the law, as Eric was saying earlier, there's a lot of people who are incarcerated or who are marginalized because of cannabis, whereas it is a medicine, and that comes into the propaganda that was pushed out there. In my generation alone, when I was younger, my mother was no drugs, no weed. Weed was a drug. It was very hard. And then the media around it, all the commercials that you see, which is kind of the lead into my studies. All those things also influence the bigger picture in communities. I'm not quite sure where I'm going. Sometimes I have a trail. I'll just kind of like chit chat around and bounce around.
It's okay. Erin, if you don't mind, I'll just pick up from what I was saying before, because like you're talking about access to medicine, and I'm talking about how we work for a company like Grassroots that also distributes medicine to all different red markets that are in operation all across Canada that are First Nations communities, right? So this is how the red market is expanding, and this is how all the diverse positions of like the people that are here speaking today, we've actually found our place in this market to help it go. And this PCBA model that kind of was the premise of this conversation, we naturally landed on something and are continuing to feed, and that PCBA is continuing to give back in a way that Pikwakanagan is able to really be a leader in the red market, I believe, all across the country.
And I just want to jump on what sort of, just for everybody else, especially those not in Ontario, what makes Pikwakanagan unique is it's an Aboriginal title, claim, and then it's currently being negotiated. It's near the end of its stages. So what I would suggest is for the last 20 plus years, the community has been actively engaged in consultations through the province, municipalities, and through their own First Nation. So they're used to this level of engagement, and they're used to having committees. So to create the PCBA isn't a big leap, because they have a lands committee, and you have a land code, and you have to create all these things, and to have to write all of this stuff down all the time gets really tiring. So it's not like I'm thinking of some of the old, more traditional Indian Act communities where you got to have an elections code and everything has to be written out, and then you're gonna have a cannabis code and everything's written out. It's not as onerous as that, and I think, just for thinking of my friends in Saskatchewan or something, there's a reason why this community is a little bit more dynamic, and I just thought it was worth sharing.
For sure, absolutely. I would like to also continue to share about how we are able to be very professional and at par with a lot of other brands and possibly other distributors that contribute to the cannabis supply. We made sure a long time ago that we were going to not leave any room for, even internally within our community, for chief and council to find any reason or any community members to be able to defamate the character or the quality, the safety of the product. And it's very simple. It's as simple as using the same Health Canada accredited testing facilities that exist in many different parts of the country. And I've even learned that just within the last recent time, there's even been Indigenous labs that have opened up internally. And I mean, here we go. We've been using, I'll share, Cannabis Labs in Vancouver, British Columbia, that I actually went to go see myself. It's a cool part of my job last year. I got to go out to Kelowna to the, I have it right here. the National Indigenous Cannabis and Hemp Conference. It was in Kelowna. It was amazing, like seriously amazing. And then we drove 5 hours down to Vancouver and we went to go visit this testing facility, and they let us in. I mean, it was a set meeting. We got to meet some of the technicians. We got to see the equipment that they use. We got to see, you know, their simple little sticker on the wall that they had that makes them different from the rest, you know. And you know, we take pride in, you know, testing every 5 pounds of distillate that we make that goes towards the manufacturing of our edibles. There's an in-house testing process. We have machinery that are, you know, tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars. We've invested to be completely at par, if not supersede any other health expectations. You know, and the diverse nature of how we have been able to employ people from off reserve, other Indigenous people who happen to live in the very interesting Ottawa Valley area. You know, Aaron works with a lot of those people as well in office. So it's really interesting to think about it, because if you were to drive through Pikwakanagan, you know, we're small and there's just these little tiny little dispensaries. A lot of them are smaller. Doesn't mean that they're not you know, well built or anything. They're really, really proud shops that we have around here. And then you see grassroots, it's just huge, because inside there's the dispensary, there's a warehouse, there's an upstairs, that's a whole manufacturing kitchen, and there's the whole administrative side of the two businesses. And so the other business is called Two Canoes Trading Company. That's the manufacturing distribution company that is in partnership with Grassroots Healing. And yeah, so does anybody want to jump in here and before we get on to our next points? Eric, you're good? Okay.
I am good.
Dan, sorry, Dan, can I just ask one question?
Yeah.
Do you want to throw, does anybody, I saw that there was a bunch of questions coming in. Maybe it would, is there a time to maybe just throw one that maybe was relevant to something that we just talked about right now?
I think for right now, it's just some comments and feedback coming through. I don't see anything in the Q&A, but just a reminder to the attendees, if they did want to jump in the conversation or have any questions, they can pose that in the Q&A or the chat section. So we can continue, I guess, on to the next subject.
So it's really important to talk about what the PCBA has been able to contribute to the community, and another reason why it makes the value of how we've been able to formalize this association to date to be very relevant to other communities. You know, I believe in the beginning it probably started off very, very simple as internal community requests, but we realized that there was a lot of money coming in because each of the dispensaries were really contributing. They wanted to be a part of this association. So I believe like we've been operating probably about like almost 90% of the dispensaries on the reserve have always been actively involved in the PCBA. Aaron can definitely talk a lot more about the specifics, but I know for a fact that a huge donation of upwards of $20,000 to date have probably been put towards a food bank, starting a food bank that has expanded quite larger than its initial intent to just be for the local community. And the need to feed families became very, very evident in the common factor of, you know, why monies were being asked for donations. So knowing that we had access to quite a large kitchen within our facility, and we had a team full of people who were very interested in helping, we started a meal delivery program to date almost over 25 individual families on reserve every single week for over an entire year. And I know Aaron.
Yes. The list has made it to nearly 30 families that we feed on a weekly basis. We do have a Red Seal chef in-house that helps us with our meal planning. We've also worked with a nutritionist to make sure that the meals are in fact healthy and it's not just, you know, packed with carbs and junk food. It's healthy. And then they get freezer boxes, and the deliveries happen bi-weekly, and they get enough meals. I think it's 2 or 3 meals we try and aim for 3, sometimes it's 2. It gets into cost and packaging and stuff, and it gets delivered every second Tuesday by somebody in our team. It's volunteer based. We also have a food cupboard that goes into the community. That food just gets donated because some people, not everybody wants to come in or feel comfortable being a part of the meals program. It is still, like, it is growing, but also we have the food cupboard that we have been donating groceries to and work with. Sometimes it's a little bit of a trade to help go. There's been discussions of making this more permanent, as that's one of the things that we're working on with the community engagement manager, Jose, is having this turn into a permanent program, something that's not going to go away. One of the things about meal programs, or something like meal programs, is they'll get developed, and a lot of the times when you rely on government funding or outsource funding and things like that, they fall apart and they fall through, or they get discontinued because of lack of funding, or it gets cut off, or the money has to go somewhere else and gets redistributed. And that affects anybody at a grassroots level, not grassroots to shop. So one of the things that I like about this program is it's ongoing, and there's no requirements. If you need a meal and you're hungry, you can, even ask around and put an application. You don't have to, there's no boxes that you need to tick. You just need to be a community member, and that's what we do. We had it weekly before, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to go back to being weekly. COVID has obviously put some restrictions onto how we navigate in time and space. COVID is a reality for everybody, but the program is still going and it is growing. I'm really excited to see it turn into something, to watch it grow, to see where it goes. Yeah, that's all I have to say for that.
There is a question. I can read the question.
Sure.
If that's okay, Jose.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
It says, this is Anne-Marie, representing the People's Alliance of Cannabis in Canada. Can you please tell us a bit more about the origins of the red market in terms of how Indigenous cannabis is being termed? Is this the best term for non-Indigenous cannabis movements to use when referring to Indigenous cannabis? And I'll take a first stab at it, because I guess I read it. But what I would say is it's not offensive to me. I'm of Aboriginal descent, but I'm not a status member. I don't find it offensive. I think the idea was to distinguish it from the mainstream government controlled market to that of the black market. It's not black market. Jose spoke very eloquently about how it's being tested. There's a Red Seal chef. This is very mainstream. The products that you see in stores like Grassroots are the same that you'll see at the OCS website, right? So it was to distinguish it's as far as like, if you were strictly speaking black law lawyer, you would say it's all black market, but it's not black market. And the way to make the distinguishment is to say, it's the red market. And I think it's a term we all kind of proudly own.
Absolutely. And the very, very first part of that question, is interesting in itself, because this is the thing that, maybe non-Indigenous, non-Indigenous people perhaps sometimes is just not part of their innate thought process. We as Indigenous people never need anyone or anything to give us permission to do anything. Like we have that sovereign right. So in terms of legalization of happening across the country, that was kind of like the let's go, and we didn't need anyone to tell us nothing. All you needed was balls and money. Really, it took some balls to be the part, to be the first people to start this out, and nobody knew what the backlash was going to maybe be. And as I said, every single community is completely different, and
just the idea of like a non-Indigenous person saying red market, does that in any way bother you?
No, because
it doesn't to me either.
Since the very beginning, it was to, I guess, I always looked at the legalized market as the green market, because the stuff that everybody was smoking before was the black market. And there was no Indigenous people involved in the black market before to the scale of it being relevant, I believe. So when the legalization happened and our sovereign rights were being asserted, damn right that's the red market, because we are First Nations people. And I'm not talking about red skin. I'm not talking about that kind of classification. It's a term used on the industry, not on the people.
You know, the one thing I thought, as I'm thinking about this, I don't know how long it's been legal. I think it's 3 years, but I thought there'd be a lot more cultural appropriation coming from the mainstream green market, as he called it. You know, where you'd see like Haida type imagery and totem poles, and it would be on your packaging. And I know that they have a lot of regulations federally for the packaging. And then I assume that then there'd be a confusion between, oh, I support the red market because I buy Tilray's Indigenous branded cannabis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would probably make us all a little bit more upset than anything else that could possibly be done or said, eh?
And Eric, you said something that is relevant in terms of the standardized points, but one thing that is relevant in the red market that perhaps isn't in the green market is that we don't have the Health Canada federally regulated impositions on concentrates and dosing. So we don't follow those same guidelines. That does not mean that we do not manufacture low dose CBD, 1-to-1s, THC. It just means that we have the room, because we have the sovereign right, to make the array of products that we see fit and safe. And in terms of other manufacturing companies out there that are First Nations, I'm not saying that Two Canoes is the only one. I'm not saying that Grassroots is the only distributor, but we definitely have a good portion, I believe, almost 50, if not 60 different First Nations dispensaries that are on within the red market that we have a relationship with. And it is relevant to note that there are different tiers of how a cannabis community can exist. And the last thing I'll say just in this little part here of me blabbing is that an example would be Oromocto First Nations in New Brunswick. So there, the chief and council, the administration, operate the dispensary, and we supply them, and they hire their own members. So that's like a different version of the red market, because there is that, it is a form of control, it is. And there's a benefit, and there's a whole conversation within that model itself, which we don't have time for today.
But if you think about like Health Canada and what happened and why the red market is not subscribing to it, has to do with how it was implemented. Because they said that it was going to be legalized, and then when it became legalized, there was no startup funding for people in the red market. There was no startup funding for people who had already been doing it. Like we'll say, like in Vancouver, think of all the compassion clinics, right? They said you have to close down. The BC government in that case was like, if you ever want to operate legally, you have to shut down right now. There's no transition, right? They were not doing anything wrong, except on October 17th, it was now legal, and October 16th, you were a lawbreaker. So that's created this sort of uneasiness between the red market and the green market, because they're doing the same thing, they have the same quality, but one is being sanctioned by the government and the other is being accepted by the government. And it's got this sort of a different dynamic than what would be typical. And I think that if you go and you buy from the OCS store, $0 goes to First Nations. The policing increased immensely. I worked with the UCCM police on their budget. They had budget increases, and they had to go to the federal government. There's no excise tax for them. You think of some of the remote communities up in Northern Ontario with health and addictions issues. They have no extra money coming from the excise tax for that. Businesses that want to start up, there's no money for Indigenous businesses because what's the one in Wabatek? which is funded by the federal government, they see cannabis as a vice, so they don't fund it. But if you're just off reserve, you could get funding from your Northern Ontario Economic Development Corporation, right? Whatever that would be, like the Fed North stuff. So there's this, if you're first in the market, you do really well. And they made it so nobody who's living on reserve could be first in the market. And then everybody else got rich off of it, except there's obviously people like Grassroots and the Pikwakanagan, the retailer association, where they knew they had to be first in. And now we have this sort of uneasiness. But I think what's ultimately going to happen is the government's ultimately going to have to say that you're right. And as long as you are doing it properly, we're going to let you continue.
And that's a great segue to start talking about the medicine aspect of all of this. And, you know, how I can segue into that is by saying, you know, there's many tiers and prongs to why Grassroots, you know, it hires me and gives me this amazing opportunity to reach out to many different First Nations that, you know, aren't started in cannabis, and then we can build these conversations and then use the good solid examples of Pikwakanagan to help them feel more confident and not feeling like they always need to, quote unquote, sell out and go the licensed route, that they can do this on their own and, you know, with the community, and also to help the conversation, because, you know, sometimes internally, and Aaron can definitely speak on this with me for sure, is that sometimes it's not even about the economy, it's not about the safety. Sometimes it's just about the old narrative, the stigma. You know, if some First Nations communities aren't saturated with Catholicism and Christianity, there's all these different layers that you have to break through in conversation just to have the willingness to even start a conversation. And then you have to really get at people in the heart, because what are we talking about here? I know from the 3 years I worked at the Federal Women's Correctional Institution in Nova Scotia, the 4 years I spent at a First Nations treatment center that services First Nations and Inuit from all over Canada. And I know from growing up in Toronto, and I know from living on a reserve now for almost 15 years, alcohol and illicit drug use and prescription drug use, more so prescription drug use, is single-handedly responsible for deteriorating our entire existences generation after generation. So I left my job at the treatment center and hopped onto this unknown road. And I'm, you know, and here I am knocking on everyone's door saying, hey, want to talk about cannabis? Where are you guys at? Okay, you're here, let's join the conversation here. What do you need? Let's link you up with this. Hey, you want to talk about good product? We got it. Like, you know, it's just this wonderful existence now of communication. We're talking about decolonizing our wellness, our access to better lifestyle, to medicine, to unity.
That was really well said. I'm just going to acknowledge that. That was very touching. I agree with everything that you say. I share the exact same values and beliefs as Jose does. When we talk about decolonizing cannabis, and as she was talking about prescription drugs, like that is, they say medicine, that is like, it's not good for you. That's the drug. Whereas cannabis, plant-based medicine, it's not just like going into a shop and buying a joint. I mean, sometimes it is, and that's okay. We all, you know, we're all in different things, but specifically speaking of cannabis as medicine and decolonizing it, for me, one thing that I strongly believe in, like I'm a mom, and as I was saying earlier, I was raised differently. I was raised believing that it was bad. And for me personally, like my personal relationship with cannabis has changed significantly over these last like 2 years. I feel like I came out of a cannabis closet, and that goes right down to decolonizing cannabis. I should be comfortable with what I need to feel okay to succeed. I'm a university student. I'm a mom. I'm a friend. I'm a colleague. We all have these struggles. I do suffer from anxiety, and it helps me calm down with things like that. But when we talk about decolonizing, a lot of our rights and how we live our life was taken away from us, and living off the land. I'm always going to go back to that. That's very like my traditional values. That's where I am. So I'll always go back to that. And I've been learning how to grow my own medicine because I also wanted to learn how to grow my own food. And during this process, that's when I realized that this is decolonizing. This is like me giving me time and space to go straight back to teaching my little one a little bit differently about plant-based medicine, cannabis, and how it is. I bring him, you know, he comes to, not to Pikwakanagan, to the shops with me, but we drive around, and that's where Mummy works, and he loves it. We get to go in, and it's just a different connection. And then when we go, just to touch back to the red market term, to the question that Anne Marie had coming in, that question asking about if it's a term of how Indigenous cannabis is being termed. Is it the best term for non-Indigenous cannabis movements to use when referring to Indigenous cannabis? I think that kind of goes in conversations like that when we're decolonizing cannabis. You can say the Indigenous cannabis industry if you do have apprehensives to the terms that you are using. I didn't answer that. I had to think about it because I don't, you know, just general different perspective. But all these types of things go hand in hand when we talk about decolonizing cannabis. There's different narratives behind it. And that's one of the key things. Like this Zoominar right here is an introduction conversation. This is an opportunity that we get to, you know, come together and share our thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you, Erin. You know, looking forward, Pikwakanagan has been involved in the red market for almost a whole 3 years now. And it is very exciting in the position that I'm in, you know, outside of the community outreach that I do in my immediate position, but just my knowledge of, you know, what is coming our way, interest that's coming our way, to build a network. Even this example right here, not that this achieves a goal of anything materialistic. This whole conversation and this amalgamation of a platform of speakers and the platform is a good example of how the common factor between all of this is what? It's cannabis, right? And it's because at the end of the day, no matter red market, green market, black market, gray market, whatever, at the end of the day, there's access to the source that we're all talking about. And looking forward, what the red market needs is kind of the same thing that any individual dispensary or cannabis industry entrepreneur needs. And we all need a little bit of reassurance, you know, and we all need a little bit of teamwork and unity. And we all need to be honoring at the end of the day what this plant is. And that's why always making sure that we're going forward in this industry in the most sustainable ways. And grassroots, you know, is a term that can get kind of thrown around a little bit, but what I see happening in Pikwakanagan is just exactly that natural want to formalize and protect and nurture and strategize and you know, risk mitigate and all of those things is real. And if we continue to go in this way, I really feel that, I mean, it's almost like a breath of fresh air, you know, like we're all looking for something to kind of change the mass narrative that we're all under this cyclone of the world that's going on, right? Like we all need something to pull us together and create something like that's an economy that's transferred between all of these different you know, dimensions and communities that we're all from. So,
you know, and just thinking of some of comparisons across the province, the problems I've seen are usually when it's like the government, being the province of Ontario in particular, have their own rules that get in the way. And what's been most successful is when a community and its leadership are able to create their own model. So in your community, you have the issue of The retailers did their own thing, and then the First Nation itself did hands off. I've seen it like up in Nipissing, they have it where they don't want to sell edibles, but since they allow retail stores, well, you can order it through the mail, and then there's no control on who has it, right? Because somebody can use their parents' credit card and have it mailed to their house, for instance, right? So they can't just ban all edibles and set their own law. That was their own choice, right? And you have to respect that as a community. But the store in town, or sorry, the store in Nipissing is like, you could just go to North Bay 2 minutes down the road and they have a competitive advantage, because you're not just going to buy flour at where we are and buy chocolates up the road. You're just going to buy everything up the road. So they have this competitive disadvantage, and this is created by essentially the provincial regulations, and it's much better. Right. Yeah, it's much better when you have it where the First Nation community comes together and decides what they want. If you don't want to have it in your community, that's your choice, and that's allowed. But yeah. I've seen it, the way the legislation is, if the chief doesn't like you in particular, he can say no to your store under the Ontario legislation and allow his brother to have his own store. And it doesn't make any sense that way. And we're talking about colonialization. And it's like, if you follow the OCS and their framework, you're continuing to be under the thumb of an oppressive regime. You're not able to operate. You must purchase from them. You must follow their rules. Every 2 years, there can be a new chief elected. They happen not to like you, you have to close your store. No other retail operation in Ontario has these levels of restrictions. And that's a recipe to fail. And that's what PCPA did, was they created their own self-regulating system where together they regulate each other, not on the whim of who got elected on a populist movement. Not
only that, but we are able to supply all clientele, regardless of where they come from, really good quality product. And I have these conversations all the time. Like, I worked for an entire month this summer in the grassroots dispensary on the floor doing sales. And I'm glad I just remembered this point now, because 85% of the clientele that came through that door were senior citizens and who were retired. And they were First Nations, and they were from every other race and country you can possibly imagine, because the Ottawa Valley and the main highway to cottage country heaven, where Muskoka, Madawaska, Huntsville, all those beautiful places are, well, guess what? You got to drive past Pikwakanagan, and everybody knows now about Pikwakanagan being weed heaven. We have people drive from Toronto because they know that they can come and they can buy really high quality, sometimes outdoor bud for $100 for an ounce. We're able to do these really good price points within our own market, and it's available to not just First Nations people, because we have the right to sell.
I know chiefs from the far north go to your community, see what happens, and say, how do we get this here? Because opiates are an issue, right?
Yeah.
And why are senior citizens going in? I've sat in the store, and it's kind of funny. Everybody's got silver hair. And it's because it's medicine. It helps with your arthritis. It helps with your aches and pains. And we need to acknowledge it for what it is. And we need to stop putting layers of restrictions on it. It's the first time that we legalized something that was considered to be so toxic, right? Like, it's the beginning. We weren't going to get it perfect. I say I didn't have anything to do with it other than consultation meetings where I said you're doing it wrong. But, at the end of the day, it's like the federal government and the provincial government need to re-examine what they're doing and need to just completely say, well, let First Nations self-govern on this issue, because they were not allowed to sit at the table at the national level, at the provincial level, and they're being dictated to. And it's nice that the police recognize that they're not going to go in, because it is a self-governing territory. I see another question from Sherry Bennett. I'll read it, unless it might just be. Is it a question, Sherry? It says, this conversation is extremely important. Many mainstream people do not know about the importance of Indigenous cannabis for communities and local economies. My name is Sherry Bennett. I own an educational platform called Let's Talk Cannabis. If any of you would like to write articles about cannabis medicine, the legal challenges, I will publish it to my platform.
Oh,
That's
that's
your
awesome.
question, Sherry. That's great, though. Cannabis medicine is an important topic in the context of harm reduction, especially since we're facing an opioid crisis. Yeah, and I mean, the opioid crisis is not getting better with this pandemic.
No,
and
it's
it's everywhere. I used to live in Cambridge, and they had a far bigger opiate problem than First Nation communities. It's everywhere. It's so sad. Thanks, Sherry.
Erin, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just thinking that next in the meals program, harm reduction, I was reading an article. I can't remember. I can't say if it was a First Nations community, but an article about cannabis and how it's being donated and used to give to help battle the opiate addictions, because it is on the rise. And it is important for me that mainstream people do not know about the importance of Indigenous cannabis for communities and local economies. Yes, I think it is very important that we have more conversations in the mainstream green market, whatever you want to call it. And this is, yeah.
I'm just very happy that, you know, these conversations are building, you know, even in some of the communities that I have reached out to. I'm not going to name which ones they are, but they have come to visit Pikwakanagan. You know, they've walked through the community with me. They've seen all the dispensaries. They've seen the entire operation of the manufacturing and the distribution and the dispensary. They've heard it. They've sat down. They've asked questions about the PCBA. You know, we've answered as much questions as we can, and now they're doing it on their own in their communities.
I think the thing is,
the blah 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 Cannabis Business Association.
Optimism is contagious, and they see your optimism, and they see what you can do with it.
I'm also reaching out to the chief and councils, and I'm telling them, I'm talking to you guys, and I'm talking to the community members. Someone's gonna act first, and when you're ready, we're here to not only supply you with safe, quality, Indigenous made cannabis products, but we also have the strategic formalization of a sustainable cannabis culture community model. And we're your brothers and sisters, your Anishinaabe brothers and sisters here in Ontario. You know, is it perfect? No, we're learning things all the time, but it's been a great story so far. And, you know, now that we're landed almost at 3 o'clock, I think this is probably a good ending point. Because at this point, we've kind of shared what the journey has been so far. Obviously, the political layers that are involved in this are a whole other presentation. Eric, did you want to say anything in closing?
Yeah, I would just say that in terms, if this were a novel, we're at the beginning of the book.
Oh yeah.
You know, and by the time we get through it, like the idea of manufacturing and looking at quality, like we're just beginning. I've had the benefit, you know, attending conferences like the one you said in Kelowna. I've attended similar conferences in Ottawa and stuff, and just trading notes with people, or the fact that I have people who call me for legal representation in other communities. And you'll be like, okay, you know, this is what you might need to do, but everybody's kind of in a different stage, but as a result of that, we're able to share what we know and our experiences, and from there, I really think the momentum has started to grow, and I think what's happened in Pikwakanagan is excellent. But I mean, Tynaga has done well. There's a whole bunch of other communities that are really starting to pick up. And then from there, it's the membership and the entrepreneurs who are saying to their own community, look, we have the same opportunity here. Mm-hmm. And it's really up to the community. I mean, we have to listen to our elders and what they have to say about this. And I think that it's really beneficial for government and for First Nation leadership to sort of be a bit more hands-off.
There is one more question, if you guys want, from Bob Hansen, if you wanted to take that.
Yeah.
I can read it out for you. So it says, tough question, but could cannabis be the next crisis as people adjust to the different aspects of it? Has science concluded the effects of concentrates? Hard question. Did we properly understand how to use alcohol or tobacco?
Can't compare those three, though. You know,
That's a-
alcohol is like almost carcinogenic, and it literally kills you from the inside out. So does tobacco.
Cannabis
In
has
terms
been
of
around.
industry.
Cannabis has been around like and studied extensively for well over 100 years in this country, and it was banned through without any parliamentary discussion after the United States banned it because jazz musicians in New Orleans, which is code for black people, were using it. So the law itself was first created for its prohibition out of essentially just straight up racism. And then in the 100 years of prohibition, the people who were against it studied it extensively and told us it was a gateway drug and told us it was harmful. Well, you know, eating it isn't smoking it, right? So it's overall, it's not harmful. If you have certain underlying mental health conditions, you might want to be careful, right? But, and also your age, from what I understand, it affect
Yeah,
the development of your
in
brain.
terms
But
of in
it's not
terms of the realm
comparable.
of that question, we are our own worst enemy in terms of the human capacity to, you know, exert and abuse power. In that sense, I mean, cannabis is vulnerable, you know, and then that makes access to the medicine vulnerable. And then that makes the overall narrative of how cannabis went, you know, very vulnerable. But we are our own worst enemy. We can destroy this opportunity, or we can recreate, honestly, I don't mean to sound like a hippie, but like a totally different society. Point blank. And I'm on that ship, and anybody who wants to try and get in the way, well, you're going to have to deal with me.
Cannabis be the next crisis. I don't think so. And I also don't think that, you know, when we talk about cannabis as medicine, it doesn't mean rolling a joint and actually smoking it. I mean, if you're going to be using it as medicine, you should be informed to what you're consuming. You should be talking to your doctor or somebody that uses plant-based medicine and understands it, that knows how the soil, like what your seed is in, what the soil was grown in, the percentage of it. If you're going to be using it as a topical, it doesn't, you know, or if it's CBD, there's so much around cannabis that it is, I don't think it'll turn into a crisis. And I don't think you can even compare that to tobacco. Tobacco is also a medicine that we use not for smoking, but it's used for offerings. Alcohol is not something that is one of our medicines, but there are people in this world that, you know, I know in Russia, they use vodka, takes shots of vodka. Alcohol came into, alcohol when it was forced onto the Indigenous people. That is a totally bigger conversation that we don't have time for. So I don't think you can compare the three of them together or compare that the crises will come out of it. And even the substance itself, like cannabis, tobacco, and alcohol, they're very different. They all serve different purposes. Just to speak to that question.
Yeah, and I think that just the fact that people ask that question, the positive thing that I see in that is, you know, we do see the greater good, and we all kind of are like, is this too good to be true? You know, and no matter how we frame the question, at the end of the day, I believe as a global society, we can no longer carry a narrative where, you know, cannabis and drugs are bad in the same sentence. We're way past that time.
And the lack of prohibition, not just in Canada, but places like Israel and the United States and Germany, where it's now used medically, have allowed other people around the world to look at how to deliver it safely and effectively. And this is just, you know, as I said, the book's just starting. So I know like how it's delivered through pharmaceuticals and trying to isolate certain functions of the plant. I don't know how well they're going to do with that, but I mean, it's such early days. I will read what somebody wrote. It was Sherry who wrote this. Cannabis does not come with the risks of life-threatening addiction or lethal overdose. And that's true. And I think that it's an apples to oranges comparison. I know we're a little after 3, so my final comments, I'll just say I really appreciate the time, and I shared it with 2 excellent panelists.
Oh, miigwech, Eric, I'm so happy I got to meet you finally.
Yeah, miigwech, heard good things.
All right, well, I just want to thank you all. That was a very important and enlightening discussion. That conversation hopefully will spark further conversations down the road. Thank you, Jose, for putting this together. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Eric. Thank you to the attendees. Again, this recording will be made available to all the registrants, and we'll post it on our OCannabis website as well as our social media. So thank you again so much. Please stay safe and happy holidays, and we'll see you again in January. Thank you again. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.